Wall Street's succession plans here. We know that bank veteran Ted Pick will succeed Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman at the start of 2024. Morgan Stanley announcing back in May that Gorman would step down and select his successor from one of the bank's three main division heads. But Morgan Stanley's leadership shakeup raises the big question: who else among big bank CEOs could be passing the baton? So let's focus in here on Ted Pick, give the people what they need to know about Mr. Pick, formerly or previously head of equity capital markets here, also is credited with having a hand in helping the firm raise capital during the financial crisis here as well. And so a kind of storied career over at Morgan Stanley and some of the larger times in either the great financial crisis or even through the pandemic and times even between. I think that's where they're kind of leading into the bench that they do have, the roster that they do have, and trying to promote from within there as well.
It certainly was not a surprise. It was well signaled ever since James Gorman announced that he was going to eventually be stepping down. But it's interesting just in terms of the street's reaction, taking a look at some of the analyst commentary coming out this morning, just really discussing the fact that Gorman has such an influence, obviously, over the bank ever since taking control of CEO back in 2010, and the direction in which he has steered Morgan Stanley. So any sort of change, obviously, could be potentially a little bit tough, at least in the short term. Mike Mayo out from Wells Fargo saying that he is a very tough act to follow when it comes to what we could expect here going forward. Mike Mayo saying that the new CEO faces a 2024 consensus EPS reset, asset management headwinds, muted investment banking, also challenges in managing peers while the ex-CEO stays on as chair. This can make for a tricky few quarters. But again, on the other hand, though, it does remove this overhang that has certainly been on the stock ever since Gorman announced that he was going to be retiring. And that was the main takeaway from the desk over at JP Morgan, just saying that they don't expect any material change in strategy. That's also something that Ted Pick has reiterated since being named CEO last night. But they do also point out that the block trading matter is still an overhang for the stock. A resolution would be helpful in JP Morgan's view in terms of the direction or getting better clarity going forward here for Morgan Stanley. But we're looking at a 3-month chart. You're looking at shares under pressure off just about 24% year to date. The stock down about 16%. We'll see what Ted Pick does as a top job and how he then further accelerates the company here moving forward.
And as we mentioned at the outset of this conversation, I mean, this places in extreme focus the succession plans that are needed at so many of the other large banks here in the U.S. You think about Jamie Dimon and how he's even been looked at for some of the top cabinet or financial roles in the past for different administrations. And so with that in mind, there's any time in the future, perhaps, where if it sounds appealing enough, if the job sounds like something that he wants to have a hand on, then JP Morgan's going to need to figure out who they put into that position. They've already had some of the top brass rotate out into other CEO positions. I think about Dasunda Brown-Duckett, who is now the CEO over at, oh my gosh, I want to say TIA, but I don't want to be incorrect fully on that. TIA, yeah, actually, that was correct. Good job, Brad. Anyway, thinking about the transitions there, thinking about the transitions over at Goldman Sachs, where even earlier this year there was kind of a quarrel or a little bit of a quibble externally here about what internally was taking place at Goldman Sachs and who could potentially be a successor there after David Solomon. And then even more so, you think about where in all of the roles, even for Brian Moynihan, where he had been on a short list to become the next Treasury Secretary. I mean, so all of these banks need to do a clear job of communicating, all right, what the leadership ranks look like, who is perhaps next in line. And I'll also say as well that outside of Jane Fraser, we don't have a lot of gender equity or diversity, I should say, or even ethnic diversity for sure at the top of many of these banks. And considering the clients that they sell into, so many services and manage financial accounts for, you would love to see more of that and more of the DEI initiatives that all of them have put forward, perhaps net out in some new faces at the top of these companies as well. All right, I'm gonna get off the.
No, but that is a good point. And when we talk about the potential successor here to Jamie Dimon, there have been a couple female names floated. One of those being Marion Lake, who could potentially succeed Dimon. So maybe we will see more women, more females taking on those leadership positions at some of the largest banks.